about the worst improv I've done in a long time. Good idea, couldn't execute on it. How are you guys doing? Got a question already. It's Cardo. Hello, Cardo. Nice to see you. Cardo says, "Hi, Eddie. I hope you're doing well." I am. Thank you. Today. Do you think Louis Armstrong would sound as Louis Armstrong if he was playing a Bach 1 mouthpiece? Could he sound so bright and be able to play those high notes? Okay, so first of all, I have no clue what Louis Armstrong played on. Let me look it up real quick. So I would have to answer that. Yeah, I don't see anything that I would trust here as a... Yeah, that's just a bunch of people trying to sell mouthpieces. So, first of all, I don't think it would affect his range. I think back in those days, people played what they had. If you look at the rest of his story, I read his autobiography, and he was, in the beginning, he was poor. So, you basically played on the horn that you had, and you played on the mouthpiece that you had, and you did what you could with what you had. I don't think there, and even worse than that, really, there wasn't a bunch of choice. Even if you did have money, I don't think there was, like today, it's just an amazing thing what we have today, equipment-wise. So yes, I do think that the range would not have been affected. No, the only thing I remember specifically about his equipment that was mentioned in the autobiography was that, hello, Seppo, nice to see you, was that he altered his mouthpiece. He would, I think this came from hello, Karen. I think this came from the autobiography. He would file notches in his mouthpiece so that when he twisted the horn, he could get higher notes. So in that regard, if you ask that question, could he play on a Bach 1? Maybe he couldn't play on any mouthpiece that didn't have those grooves cut in it. I don't know. So now, to talk about the sound that they got back in those days was largely what you hear today and say, oh, listen to his sound, was largely on the electronics side. They started off with such crude equipment. And, they couldn't even do, in the beginning, they didn't even have stereo, right? I remember here in town, a band, Sebastian Whitaker. If you guys look up the name Sebastian Whitaker, let me see what comes up on YouTube. It's a shame that he's not more well known than he is. Yeah, that's a shame. There are some videos, but I would have hoped that his recordings would have come up. But I think he passed away before YouTube was really big as a thing. Anyway, he had a band. And his idea was to record the way that people used to record back in that era of music that he liked so much, right? And so they had one microphone, and they would, if someone was too loud, they had to move them back. If someone was too soft, they would have to move them forward. Everyone playing into one microphone. And, as it's sort of like the jazz version of these guys that play on period instruments. And I love the idea of playing on period instruments, but it's still just not as beautiful as playing on modern instruments. And it's the same thing with the microphones and all that stuff. And what I'm trying to get to is that the the sound that they got was largely based on the equipment they had, the rooms they were working with, that kind of stuff. What kind of technology they were working on, doing uh, for the actual recording. I think if you would have taken Louis Armstrong with all of the same equipment and time travel him to today, you wouldn't even recognize him for the sound. I think that's how much of an impact the technology had. And when we listen to recordings, we should always keep that in mind. When we listen to recordings, always say to yourself, this is not what this person really sounds like. Part of what we're hearing is the technology. I hope that makes sense. I'm not saying, I'm not saying that great players don't sound great in person. I'm not saying that. Of course they sound great. Um, but it's different. It's entirely different. What they sound like in person is entirely different from what they sound like in the recordings. Now, I think the recordings, you guys have heard me say very, very often how important it is to listen to the great trumpet players. And I still feel that way. You have to listen to the great trumpet players. And recordings are just a very convenient way to do a lot of that. But you have to, while you're listening to those recordings, you have to always keep in mind that part of what you're hearing is the technology. It's almost fake. You can be for certain that the stuff like the EQ is fake. What is the EQ? The EQ is when you make some frequencies stronger or weaker than other frequencies. So if they have a bright sound, that can be the EQ. If they have, and I won't go into the details of all that, but they have compression, they've got EQ, they've got gating, and that's just like the basics. That's the basics of what has to be used every single time, always, anyway. So yes, and they didn't have a lot of that back then. So they didn't even use multiple microphones in the beginning. So yeah, so I know that's not exactly the answer you're looking for, because you're talking more about the equipment. I don't think we can know anything about any of that if we don't, the recording equipment between now and then is so vastly different that we could really just say, now there are recording engineers that will say, oh, I can help you get that sound. Well, they will help you get that sound with their equipment. They can take someone like me, which I have like almost the opposite sound of Louis Armstrong. They can take someone like me and make it sound like that. I don't like that kind of thing because it's unnatural. It's fakery. I don't like any kind of fakery. Anyway, Karen's here. Karen says, "Is there a particular way to do a glissando from E to C on the staff and F sharp to D on the staff?" So we have, just like we have with falls and stuff like that. So are these descending or ascending? So E to C. Depending on the context, you can do a diatonic glissando. So we have different kinds of glissandos that we can do. You can do a half valve glissando. You can do that. What I did first was a diatonic. You're just playing the scale up to the C. Okay. You can do a wiggle your fingers glissando. You can do that kind of glissando. If you're playing higher, then you could do, let's say, you could just do it with your lips. So a glissando is, if we're talking classical music, the glissando is just a string of notes. It's like a turn or a like grace notes and stuff like that. So a glissando can actually be, and in fact, I think, if I'm not mistaken, most sax players, if we were playing sax, most sax players would actually play notes going up as their glissando. We are different because we can play notes in between the notes, like with a half valve and stuff like that. So there's nothing wrong. So F sharp to D. There's nothing wrong with doing that kind of glissando. You know what I will say is pay attention to what the other guys are doing, especially the lead trumpet player. If the first guy is doing a diatonic glissando, just play the diatonic glissando. What do I mean by diatonic? For those of you who don't know that word, diatonic means in the scale. Okay? If we use the word diatonic, we're always talking about whatever's in the scale. So I'm assuming that the key signature here is no flats, no sharps. That's not a safe assumption, but for the demonstration purposes, F sharp to D, the key signature is no flats, no sharps. I'm playing in slow motion. It's just basically the notes in the scale up to that second note. And we're just going to do it very fast so that it's not, so it sounds like grace notes. Okay. Now, if it's a jazzy piece, they might want half valve. And that just really depends on your section leader. What does the section leader want? Okay. But yes, we have, I think, four different ways to do this stuff. So we can do diatonic, we can do chromatic. I guess it's 5 different ways. You can do your wiggle the fingers, you can do half valve, and then if it's high enough, you can do just the lips. So 5 different ways to do a glissando. And applies both directions. It applies for ascending, it applies for descending. So let's say I have an F going to an A. There's nothing wrong with doing it like that. If it's jazz, okay. You know, with the jazz stuff, it's okay for it to be kind of messy. All right. That's what, people ask me, what's the difference between a shake and a lip trill? A lip trill is a clean alternation between two different notes. Da, ya, 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 right? Very clean. You take that and turn it into a shake by adding dirt. You have like the notes in between the notes. It's almost the same. It's just one is dirty and one is clean. That's how I like to say it. Alexander says, hello. What are your thoughts on Marcel Beach's sketches? Could you suggest any composers whose work shares a similar intensity, maybe etudes or other compositions? So is that a misprint? That looks like a misprint. I think it's. Oh, this might be something I don't know about. So I don't think it's breach. I think it's. Yeah, there's no R in that. Okay. If you take the R out, that's correct. So who would I put at the same level? So I wouldn't say that there's intensity there. That's not the word I would use. So what sets speech apart from the others is the harmonic complexity, the intervals. So if we talk about intensity, that's more of an emotional thing. I don't think that the intensity of the Beach book is as anywhere close to the intensity of the Charlier, for example. I think the Charlier can be quite a very intense etude. The Beach is not as intense as it is difficult. And you know what? I understand a lot of times trumpet players value things based on how hard they are. And that's the thing is that the Beach book stands above all of the other books in terms of difficulty. But what a lot of people don't understand about those kind of difficult things is that they lower the intensity. It might feel intense to us because it's such a struggle for us to play that stuff. Well, let me reword that. It can be a struggle for us to play that stuff. So my question for you would be, do you really mean intensity, or are you talking about difficulty? Because there are some etudes that are more difficult than the beach etudes. I can't recall them offhand. Well, actually, you know what? I would say that there's a book by, I want to say Charles Collin. I don't keep my books out here anymore. I have put them in the back room. But there's I think maybe it's published by Charles Collin, but there's a book that utilizes all modern techniques. And when I say modern, I'm talking about, I think it was written in the 50s or the 40s or something like that, utilizing all the techniques that had not been used in etudes. And I would put that as, in terms of difficulty level, one step over the beach book. It's much harder than the beach book, in my opinion, but it's because it's using these modern techniques that most of us are not familiar with. And I think there's a reason why those kinds of compositions have kind of disappeared, is because they're not musical. I don't think they had staying power because they were entirely intellectual. And that's one difference between a book like the one I'm talking about now and The Beach. The Beach was still, you could almost say it was still romantic in that it had melodies, and just how you got to those melodies was from a very protracted angle. Okay. So yes, uh, for me to answer your question, I would need to know what you mean by intense. Do you mean difficulty? Do you mean modern harmonies? Or do you mean just how, like, musically intense? Because as far as musical intensity goes, it's not that high on the scale. You can almost fall asleep to it. You know, as long as you don't imagine yourself behind the steering wheel, it's not very intense at all, in my opinion. Now, and the goal should be, for every trumpet player who plays that stuff, the goal should be to play it as if it was easy. If you play that and people are thinking, wow, look how hard that is, then you missed the mark, didn't you? When we play etudes from books like that, we should trick the audience into thinking that, hey, this guy's just playing some simple piece. That's how it should be. And, you know, I think out of all the rudiments, I know this is going to sound kind of arrogant. That's all right. I let people think that I'm arrogant. It's not true, but I can't stop them from thinking that. My routine books, the new ones, are probably some of the best exercises you can do to prepare you for the beach book. Because instead of just doing return to base, I call it returning to base, right? Bop, 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 beep, bop, beep, bop, beep, bop, beep, bop, beep, bop, right? Instead of doing that kind of interval, I do what's in the beach book. Bop, beep, bop, beep, bop, beep, bop. As you go higher, the other notes go lower. And that's part of what makes the beach book a little bit more difficult, is because he's broken from that return to base style like what you have in the Arvin book. But really, what music is like that, the music that is like that hasn't survived because people don't have a desire to hear that. It's just a trumpet thing, and rightly so, almost. We should always be striving to be able to do harder stuff, so that the easy stuff is not, you know, other people might think it's hard, but we will think it's easy. Anyway, I know that's the second question today that I'm not giving the answer you want. I will try to find that etude book that I'm talking about. It is harder than the beach book by a whole extra level. Let's put it this way. You guys know I have 7 levels that I used for my publishing. I rarely put anything out at the highest levels, but I do have those levels, right? I call that highest one the virtuoso level. And the Marcel Beach book falls inside of my virtuoso level. That other book that I'm talking about is harder than my highest level. That book I'm talking about is harder than that. Okay? So now, once again, if we're talking about intensity, doesn't sound as intense to me. Does that make sense? Okay. Karen says, okay, I guess I better ask what others are doing if I play that part. It's in the Wizard of Oz. Yeah, if it's in the Wizard of Oz, it might be a little bit more leaning towards the jazz side, maybe. Hello, Sebastian. How long are you staying live for? I am in the CST time zone. We've got about a half hour left. We usually start at 1:30 Houston time and go for about an hour. Seppo asks, at which levels do you have composed your etudes? Well, so my first etude book has etudes at all levels. I can send that book to you. I'm not a real big fan of that book. We still sell it and people still like it. I don't like it, but people like it. Then the next etude book I wrote was all flow studies, and that also has three etudes for each of my levels. So it starts off very simple and then gets more difficult. I used to like that one a lot more than I do today. Then I have literally dozens and dozens and dozens of etudes that I've written for beginners and intermediate. A lot of etudes. So, like, probably too many, because I have a system for the beginners that they're supposed to finish all the etudes from the first set before we go on to the second set. I call it graduating, right? When they finish all the etudes in that first set, and it covers rhythms, it covers stretching the notes out and stuff like that. When they finish that, they graduate, and now they come to the next level. And it really, one of these days, I'm going to publish all of that. But it's probably not what you're looking for. I have the first level, I have the second level. Then I have an etude book with short etudes in it. I call it the All-State Prep book. It's a white book with, I'll put a link to a video about it. Now, the idea behind that book, and it's not as long as it looks because it's got the tonalization studies in the back half. That's a book that's supposed to prepare high school students for the next year's all-state stuff. And the etudes tend to be only 3 lines long. And the reason for that is because the high school students here don't have time to invest in, I remember when I was in high school, studying with Kenneth Capshaw, and during that time between things that we had to do, he would assign me an etude, mostly during the summer, and that etude would be a whole page long, and I remember we did some out of the Clark characteristic studies. It took so long to learn that, and when I wrote this book, the All-State Prep book, the idea was to have short etudes so that they could be exposed to the material, finish that, move on to the next thing. So it's on purpose. It's almost, there's a book originally for French horn that I used to have my students play on. The author was Potag. I don't remember his first name, but his last name was Potag. And it's a wonderful book, and the etudes were like 2 lines long. And it covered so much material. And I thought that's a great model to help students, so you learn that thing. Maybe you're learning in this case, maybe you're learning 12/8 time signature, or maybe you're learning a specific rhythm, or maybe you're learning an interval pattern or something. It's nice to have etudes that you can, with students like that. Not everybody's the same, right? So I wouldn't teach everybody out of that book. But the ones that don't have time, and a lot of them want to have time. A lot of them really are ambitious, emotionally speaking, but not organized enough to pull that off. So they end up not having time to do their lesson stuff. And I cut back for them. That's, we'll start off maybe more ambitious and doing longer etudes. But anyway, the All-State Prep book is an etude book for the first half. The second half is basically the trumpet player tonalization studies. And it covers rhythms, it covers phrasing, it covers different slur and tongue patterns, it covers arpeggios, it's got some of the appropriate flow studies in it. So, and I'll tell you what, I don't have a lot of students that compete anymore because most of my students are adults, and there's not a lot of competitions for adults. But the students that I have in the past used with that book, it's very rare for them to not make all region, to not make, to not win and get into the ensemble at whatever thing that they're doing. Alexander says, I really appreciate the complexity, the necessary preparation, and of course the breath control. The phrase dynamics and modal movements of the Marcel Beach's compositions are captivating. Thanks. Yeah, so in terms of the difficulty combined with, like what you said, with the beauty of the pieces themselves. But yeah, for me, I just wouldn't use the word intense, really. So I think in that regard, for the stuff that you are saying, complexity, how long it takes to prepare, breath control, dynamics, modal movements, I think that book stands alone. I don't think, it's sort of like, if you compare Woody Shaw to all the other jazz players out there, there is no other Woody Shaw. Woody Shaw was in a category of his own. The language he used was his own language. The composition style was his own composition style. And I would put the Beach book in that same category. There's nothing out there like it. Not to my knowledge. My favorite one is that one. I love that etude. I spent a lot of time working on that one. I don't remember which number it is, but I really enjoyed working on that. All right. Any other questions? Yeah. I checked. I don't see any. The questions, I didn't see any questions coming in. I'm going to try to make some videos today after we're done here. Seppo says, are you familiar with the Emily Joseph Strongny? Nope. Emile Joseph. I don't know how to say the last name. "25 Etudes for Trumpet." No, I'm not familiar with those. Belgiumese. Oh, there's quite a few here. Etudes Finales, Etudes Melodicus, and Grandes Etudes. So he's actually written quite a few of these books. That's not even on my radar, really. That's something I would like to check out. Oh, and there's more. So he did the Bach. Is that what? Am I understanding that right? Oh, that's stuff that is under the recommend. They're using the same platform I am. Wow. Yes, for some reason that's something I'm not aware of, that I haven't. I'm clicking on preview. Okay, that's interesting. He has 4 etude books. I love them. I should check that out. I'll have to put that on the list. The website I'm at lets you look at one of the etudes. I don't know what book that was. That was the. Okay. Looks like this one goes through all the keys. That's one thing that I like about a good book, a good etude book, is it should go through every key. You know, the Clark characteristic studies. Major on one side, minor on the other side. Flip the page, it changes keys. Major on one side, minor on the other side. Flip the page, changes keys. So that's something that I really like in a advanced etude book. I always try to keep a ratio, a specific ratio for key signatures when I write like that. Yeah, that's a new name for me. Any other questions? Karen says, I liked your Thrive and Jive duet. Thank you. Well, thank you. You know, every once in a while, I write a jazz thing. When I'm writing for an ensemble, the way I think is entirely different for when I'm writing for a jazz group. And that one is one of those. I'll put a link for those of you who haven't seen it yet. So I wrote that like I would have written a ensemble piece. And yeah, so a lot of people are saying how much they enjoyed it, and I'm glad. I'm very glad that they like it. When I try to make something jazzy, it doesn't come out so good. Anyway, Seppo says, and another book I like in a music sight reading wise is Andre Bescon's, or Besançon. I can't say that either. Etude éclectique. Let me look that up. Okay, I'll have to do some homework on that. Yeah, I'll have to look into that. Any other questions? Let me see if I can think of any news. I had that gig last week. Not my best work. I was not happy with the gig afterwards. I was actually very upset with myself. I cracked one of the worst notes that you could crack in a big band set. At the very end of In the Mood, you have the last note. I went and you know, part of me would like to blame it on the health stuff I'm going through, and I was going through it that night. And I would love to blame it on that. I would love to. but that's not how I've lived the rest of my life, you know, and that's not what I teach. Okay, that's not what I teach. That's not how I've lived the rest of my life. If I if I had bad allergy days, I didn't blame anything I did wrong on the bad allergies. If I was overly dehydrated or hadn't eaten in days, I never blamed my trumpet stuff. I always held myself to a high standard, and I never made excuses. And that's really where I need to be today when I think back. That was a terrible performance for me. Um, and I I do so. This is the paradox of where I'm at right there with that, because I do think something was going on with my lip because of this. Like I told you, the health stuff. I don't go into details, but I am struggling with some health stuff right now, and it does have a direct impact on the way my playing is. And I do think it did something to my lips that night. And but like I said, my whole life I have never allowed myself to have excuses like that. So it puts me in a weird spot today because um, on the intellectual side, I say to myself, this is not this is not normal. This is not how things normally are. But I can't not hold myself to um, that standard. Oh, here's Dennis. Hello, Dennis. Dennis says, hi, Eddie. I like the Thrive and Drive duet as well. Well, wonderful. I'm glad you guys are enjoying that. That's great. I was thinking the other day, I'm not tooting my own horn, but I don't know of anybody that's written as many duets as I have. Not even historically. And the duets just keep flowing and flowing and flowing, and there looks like no end in sight for the duets for me. Karen says, I probably just sounded more jazzy. Yeah, other than that, the gig was really okay. It really was. So I'm not complaining. Um, I just wasn't, I was suffering a little bit while I was on the stage. Dennis says, I play in old folks bands. Lots of joy in playing for these folks in spite of busted notes. Yes, absolutely. The music itself is truly secondary. I know that's blasphemous to the trumpet worshipers, um, but the music itself is secondary. And I think the reason it upset me so much what happened on Saturday is because I was one of the few people getting paid. Um, and it just bothered me because if I don't know, I shouldn't. But yes, if they're getting paid, they should get what they paid for. And I didn't feel like I was up to that standard that night. But like I said, I was suffering all night. And it got worse as the night progressed. But I like what you're saying, lots of joy in playing for people that appreciate what you're doing, you know. And the old folk, they have a tendency to do that. All right. What other questions do we have? We've got 10 minutes left. Yeah, I'm glad you guys like that duet. You know what it's sort of like? I have another duet that's sort of like that. And it has the word jive in it too, if I remember right. No, maybe not. There it is, jiving. Now, I have to tell you that this was one of the first duets I ever recorded. So the tone quality on it, I call this one, it's a jiving singularity. And this is a duet that I dedicated to a band leader that was also a good friend of mine named Calvin Owens. Calvin Owens is worth looking up. I know I've mentioned him before. I was his trumpet player in the studio, not in his live band. He had two different bands, the one in the studio and the one that played the live performances. He's got a Wikipedia page. I'll put the Wikipedia page on here. Anyway, I dedicated that duet, this other one, to Calvin. And the one I wrote for Calvin is more of a more difficult version, kind of sort of similar as the Thrive and Jive, just more difficult. Seppo says, have you noticed my latest email to you from April 4th? I read, let me see here. I've had so much going on. Let me pull it up real quick. I read it. I probably didn't respond to it. That's terrible. Yes, you put the link to the tonalization examples. I just never answered your email. I apologize. I still have a red flag against it, so that means I intend to. I just have. It's. I know it's not. I'm just giving excuses. I apologize. I'll answer your email today as soon as we're finished with this. I apologize for taking so long. And what I'll do is I'll put that one etude book. I'll attach it to the email when I send it. So yeah. You know, between being busy and this health thing, there's days now with this health thing where it's hard for me to get stuff done. And then other days when it's not so bad. Today's not so bad. So, you know, I feel the same way about that as I was saying about the being on stage. I hold myself to that standard. I really, you know, Yeah, I just sound like I'm apologizing, making excuses. But I'll tell you what, these last, I'd say about 6, 7 months have been some very, very difficult times. So, anyway, any more questions? All right, maybe we'll shut down a few minutes early. Um, yeah, thanks guys for hanging out. And we will pick it up again next week. And I'll sit down right now and get an email out to you, Seppo, right away. Okay, as soon as we uh, log off here. All right, so see you guys next time. God bless you, and well, I hope you have a great weekend. Seppo asks, am I familiar with the Saxa etudes? Yes, I am. I actually use them. They're my favorite transposition etudes. All right, see you guys next time.